So, the context for this verse, I'm supposed to have half an hour, but I'm afraid that if I take half an hour, everybody's going to be camping out here. I'll try to do, I have a little plan, and I'll try to see if I can execute it in 20 or 25 minutes. The context for this verse is King Nimi, this king long ago, was on pilgrimage and he encountered these 9 sages. And he asked a question of each of the sages. And the question he asked of King Karavajana Rishi was, can you tell me about the different incarnations, their colors, the colors of their complexions, their names, their features, things like that, characteristics. And so he runs through the avatars for the different ages, and then he gets to the avatar for the Kali age, which is the age we live in now. It's characterized as an age of quarrel and dissension. I don't think anybody's able to miss that. That's kind of our thing nowadays. So this is one of the verses describing that particular avatar, who is Lord Chaitanya, as most of you know, the central figure on our altar. It says, O Mahapurusha, I worship your lotus feet. You gave up the association of the goddess of fortune and all her opulence, which is most difficult to renounce and is hankered after by even the great demigods. Being the most faithful follower of the path of religion, you thus left for the forest in obedience to a Vamana's curse. Out of sheer mercifulness, you chased after the fallen souls who are always in pursuit of the false enjoyment of illusion, and at the same time engaged in searching out your own desired object, Lord Shyam Sundar. Now there are a couple of ways to read this verse. You can also read it as applying to Krishna. There are a couple of things in the verse that might refer to Krishna, and also to Lord Ramchandra. This Dharmishta Arya Vachasaya Gadad Aranyam, going to the forest as out of religious duty because of the order of this Arya Vachasa can be read as the curse of a Brahmana, something uttered by a Brahmana, by a Arya refers to dharmic people, but also in the case of Lord Ramchandra could be his father, because his father was obligated to a wife. He had to ask his son, Lord Ramchandra, who was the rightful king, to go to the forest, and he chased after this illusory and elusive. Actually, he chased after this illusory and elusive deer, and therefore left his wife, who is considered to be the goddess of fortune. But our teachers tell us that this especially refers to Lord Chaitanya. And most of us have a good sense of the circumstances that are being referred to here. You gave up the association of the goddess of fortune and all her opulence. Lord Chaitanya was married to a woman also considered the goddess of fortune. A very beautiful wife, very dutiful, took good care of him, worshipped him. And but because he was cursed by a Brahmana, and the circumstances, one of my friends asked me about this today. She's not here. I think they're on the Big Island, Baba Turini and Mehari. And she tells about the Brahmana's curse. I didn't have a chance to, and this was on WhatsApp or something, and I didn't have a chance to do that yet today. But the circumstances of the curse was that where Lord Chaitanya lived in Navadvip, at a certain point in his life, he began acting like the perfect devotee of Krishna that he is, and would engage in Sankirtans, chanting that we've been doing this evening, at the home of one of his associates, Srivas Thakur, who is also on our altar on our far right. And this was a very private thing, because Lord Chaitanya wanted a certain mood. He demanded, he needed a certain mood. And if there was someone there who didn't belong, someone there whose heart wasn't in the right place, it would interfere with his mood. So this happened one night. This brahmachari, a celibate Brahmin man, very elevated in many ways, very pure, lived only on milk, which I guess is, he considered to be a very pure diet, since he was advertising himself as such. He approached Srivas Thakur and said, "I've heard about the kirtan programs in the evening, I'd like to come." He said, "Well, I'm not sure you really fit. I understand that you're very pure, that you live only on milk and maybe some fruits sometimes. But the thing is, we're a little particular about the company in these kirtans. So if I were to let you in, you'd have to hire me." So this fellow hid, and Lord Chaitanya in the kirtan, he was going, he was dancing and chanting his heart out, and every once in a while he just feels something off in the mood of the room. And finally he just said, "Somebody's here who doesn't fit. Somebody's here who doesn't belong." And so Srivas admitted to him, "Yeah, we let this guy in. I mean, he's he's celibate for his whole life, only drinks milk, he's a very elevated Brahmin." And Lord Chaitanya said, "That's not one of us, so can you excuse him, please? Otherwise, I can't get into this." So this Brahmin was miffed. So there's a little something missing in his dharmic-ness, I guess. He was more than a little miffed. And he actually approached Lord Chaitanya the next day on the bank of the Ganges. The folks in that culture would go and bathe in the river 3 times a day. So Lord Chaitanya was at the bank of the river, and this guy came up and just gave him what for, and took his sacred thread and broke it and cursed him. Gave him this really heavy curse. "I curse you that your material life will be a complete failure. No success, no love, no nothing. Everything will fall. You'll lose everything. It'll fall apart." Lord Chaitanya thought, "Oh." Because, I mean, he's actually the Supreme Lord. He's actually the Absolute Truth himself. He has everything. Really no skin off his nose. Of course, it broke everybody's heart. So he had to accept sannyas, which was actually an excuse for him to withdraw himself from the idea that he belonged to a particular village, particular family, or whatever, and instead belonged to the world. And that's actually the position of a sannyasi. For 40 years I was married, and I identified very closely with my wife and my daughters and their grandchildren later, and my job, house, all the stuff that you do. And it's natural. It's perfectly natural. If you're in that situation and you don't, then there's something wrong. Things aren't going to work out right. And eventually I was moved by odd circumstances to gradually try to withdraw from that and give myself to the world. So this was Lord Chaitanya's position here. He had the sannyasi is often referred to as a forest dweller. Aranya means forest. And one of the names for sannyasi, one of the very ancient names of sannyasi, for sannyasi is Aranya. Mine is Ashram, which is another of the 10 really ancient names. And it says, Mayamagam Daita Yepsitam Anvadava. So you went chasing, you went to the forest to chase after the kind of animal-like people who were always chasing after the illusory pleasures of this world and trying to bring them back to God. So therefore I worship you, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is, Lord Chaitanya came to give certain teachings and practices by which human beings could become more elevated. And so the question might arise, technology's not always as much fun as. Of course, there are young people for whom this is like second nature. I remember visiting one of my daughters a few years ago when her older son was less than a year old. He was just about a year old. And he was really into trains. Abhimanyu was his name. Really super into trains when he was little. And he brought me Lolly's iPad and opened it up and punched in the code and found the app, the YouTube app, where his train videos are, and found where the train videos, and started playing train videos. Not even a year old. I mean, he didn't know the numbers or anything, but he knew the pattern. He'd seen Lolly do it, and he followed that pattern. So Lord Chaitanya's teachings have been summed up in a number of ways. The Smorta Manjari, the first verse of the Bhagavatamrita, which very closely corresponds with a verse earlier in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, telling us about Lord Chaitanya's teachings. And this is another one written by one of our previous teachers about 350 years ago, named Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur. He says, Aradhyo Bhagavan Braje Satanyas Tatham Vrindavanam Ramya Kachir Pasana Rajabadu Vargena Bhakalpita Srimad Bhagavatam Pramana Mamalam Prema Kumarto Mahan Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Gatam Idam Tatradara Napara. There are any. So these are Lord Chaitanya's teachings. These are the opinions of Lord Chaitanya. That Krishna, the son of Nanda Maharaj, is the supreme personality of Godhead, and he's worshipped along with his own home, his own transcendental abode, Vrindavan. And then he said, the most pleasing form of worship is that which was practiced by the gopis of Vrindavan. We heard about that earlier today from Manjari. And he says, these statements for which we have the highest regard, he says, we don't have any higher regard for anything than this. These are the opinions of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Lord Chaitanya basically came to teach us love for God. And there's a practice for attaining that, just as there's a practice for attaining anything. If you want, we may bring some background to any endeavor that we make, but there's always a way of practicing. You know, I mean, if you want to be, if you take a look at, say, guitarists. I'm an old guy, so I've got, my kind of collection of guitar heroes. Stevie Ray Vaughan. He was a little after my time, but I discovered him by the grace of one of my students at San Diego State about 30 years ago. So I was talking about Jimi Hendrix, and he said, yeah, Stevie Ray Vaughan. And so more recently I've found some videos of Stevie Ray, including Stevie Ray Vaughan playing Moonchild, which will stand up against any Hendrix performance, frankly. Just different flamboyant dress is all. Basketball player, but one of my favorite stories is about the cello master, Maestro, what's his name, the Spanish one.
That's it.
Anyway, I can't remember all of a sudden I can't remember his name. I'll remember it as I'm falling asleep. He was considered the greatest cello, Pablo Casals. He was considered the greatest cellist of the 20th century. So he's kind of like the greatest cellist just before Yo-Yo Ma. And there's an anecdote about his being interviewed in his 90s, maybe 92, 93 years old. And he mentioned to the journalist interviewing him that he practiced 4, 5, 6 hours every day. And that practice wasn't just playing songs. It included running scales, doing exercises, and all the stuff that you learn when you're starting your cello lessons. She looked at me. I mean, this is the greatest cellist in the world, and his performing career was way in the rearview mirror. He wasn't performing at all anymore. So she asked him, "Why do you spend so much time practicing every day?" And he said, "I think I'm making progress." One of my favorite stories. So there are practices for attaining that love of God, and some attitudes as well. And there are some qualifications, the essential qualification being some faith. And what do we mean by faith? Faith in what? Well, this is also described in our sacred literatures. Shraddha Shabde Vishwas Kahi Sudardhanishtroy, Krishna Bhakti Koile Sarvakarma Kritakoy. That what we call faith, when we talk about Shraddha, when we talk about faith, we're not talking about mere belief. We're not talking about, this is what I believe. I believe Jesus is my Savior. I believe that the United States is the greatest country in the world, or anything like that. But we're talking about Shraddha Shabde Vishvasakar. Vishva means conviction, firm conviction. Shraddha Shabde Vishvasakar Sudardhanishtroy. Krishna Bhakti, what kind of faith? What kind of conviction? Krishna Bhakti Koile Sarvakarma Kritakoy. That by engaging in Krishna Bhakti, by practicing what Lord Chaitanya has taught us, everything we could want to attain will be achieved. Everything's covered. And the other side of that is kind of a loss of faith in the attainments of the material world, because everything here, Krishna sums it up himself in the Bhagavad Gita in 2 words, Dhukalayam Nashashvatam. There's at least inconvenience, at best, and Ashashvatam. Well, even the pleasure you get is temporary. And the greater the pleasure, the greater the inconvenience when the temporary nature of that pleasure plays out, because we get more bummed when we lose it. So, it's that kind of faith. And then there's a way to express that faith externally. And that is the process of Sharanagati. And that's also an important part of Lord Chaitanya's teachings. Sharanagati means the way of seeking shelter. And so it's described as having 6 aspects. Anukulyasya sankalpa, pratikulyasya vivarjanam, rakshishyatiti vishvaso, gopratve varanam tata. Oh, thank you. Oh.
Srivas.
Well, speaking of Srivas Thakur,
That's his garland.
this is his garland, and it's got these cool orchids, but it's also got tuberoses, which have power. A lot of them too. Rakshashyatiti Vishvaso, Goptatve Varanam Tata, Atmani Chepa Karpani Shabdita Sharanagati. So the way of surrender has these 6 aspects. Anukulyasya samkalpa, a determination to embrace things that are favorable for the culture of our bhakti. And I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do this in the 20 minutes I promised. Anukulyasya samkalpa, the determination to embrace whatever is favorable for the culture of the growth of our bhakti. And pratikulya vivarjana, rejecting or neglecting things that run counter to that are unfavorable. Rakshashyatiti vishvasa, the conviction, again, vishvasa, that word vishvasa, that conviction. The conviction that Krishna can protect me in all circumstances. And he may or may not protect me physically, he may or may not protect my mental health even. Those things are certainly fragile. But what he's going to protect is my bhakti, my love for God. Rakshashyatiti vishvaso, goptatve varanam tata, accepting God, Krishna, as our exclusive protector. Exclusive maintainer. that we depend on him for everything. Just like a cow would on the folks who take care of the cow. They don't have to worry, generally, they don't have to worry about, feeding. They know, the cows know they're gonna get milk in the morning, they're gonna be let out to pasture during the day with the calves, which is cool, because the calves are, they're nursing all day long. And then at a certain point, they're brought back in and fed and milked again. And they don't have to, they don't have to worry about that. If you've been anywhere where folks are keeping cows, especially dairy cows, they know the deal. They know at a certain time of day they head back to where the chow is, where those bales of hay are. And if that hay's not there, they let the farmer know. I've seen this. Regulative Principles. Atmanikshepa means giving up any selfish interest. In other words, embracing the Lord's interest. Srila Prabhupada sometimes characterizes this as making our interest the same as the Lord's interest. Whatever he wants, that's what we want. And karpanya, humility, understanding how small and insignificant we are. This is how Shraddha, this is how faith, that conviction that bhakti can give us whatever we want, is expressed. And it's not an all or nothing thing. We grow that gradually as well. So we don't need to be discouraged. If we keep practicing, just like Maestro Casals, we'll see ourselves making progress. And so these practices are embraced by those who follow Lord Chaitanya throughout their lives. And they will always see themselves as practitioners. And we have the experience of our own guru, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, that he always saw himself as a practitioner, always saw himself as a sadhaka. Sometimes when he would finish chanting 16 rounds, he would jokingly say, put his bead bag down and say, now I've finished done my 16 rounds, now I can do any darn thing. Making fun of us, because generally a lot of us would think, I got 16 rounds done today, and so now I can do the stuff I want to do. So they will always see themselves as practitioners, always looking for how they're making progress. Devotees, progressive devotees, are always introspective. And the main practice to which they apply themselves is this chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra that we've heard about so much today, this morning and earlier in the afternoon, and that we engaged in again after such a long time. Actually, a month or so ago, we had a pretty good showing for Lord Nityananda's appearance, and that was really, really nice. It was really nice. And we were hoping for something like this tonight, and not to be graded. I mean, you hear about this stuff, but we figure it's not going to happen to us. So this is our whole business as followers of Lord Chaitanya, is trying to stay in the kind of company that helps us grow our faith, that helps us continue to progress on the path of taking shelter of Krishna and his holy names. And these are Lord Chaitanya's teachings. There's a book of songs about this Sharanagati written by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the introductory song. But I have in a kind of roundabout way, not as directly as I hoped, but the hour is late, and I don't want to test the devotees' patience. So I'll stop here. Unless there are any quick questions or comments. And I just want to say, it's really nice to see all of you. I mean, some of you it has been here. Thakur,
So, can we do sinful activities and make progress in the spiritual life?
I'm sorry, I missed a word. Can we do simple?
Can we do sinful activities and then make progress in the spiritual life?
Well, eventually we'll avoid sinful activities. That's part of the process of Sharanagati. We abjure, neglect, reject things that actually interfere with our bhakti, and that's what we mean. That's what we really mean by sinful activities. Sinful activity really means things that get that interfere with my developing relationship with Krishna. We give them up. One of my friends gave a class, I think it was earlier this week, it was either this week or last week, where she talked about these four, we call them regulative principles, kind of colloquially. Actually, the regulative principles of sadhana bhakti, of practical devotional service, are 64 in number. And these four things aren't actually bhakti at all. But they're things that help us avoid the influences of this age, the bad influences of this age. And we agree to try to give those up.
Excuse me, there is a Honda dark blue 445, the plates. 445 Honda blue is blocking the entire parking lot here in the grass.
It's the Suez Canal.
No?
Maybe somebody outside.
Might be somebody outside.
Okay, so sorry for the interruption.
No worries.
Hare Krishna.
It's important business. So we agree to try to avoid certain sinful activities in order to make it easier for us to make progress in our practice. So we don't engage in violence. We don't kill animals either directly or vicariously by eating meat. We avoid things like gambling and wanton sexuality and intoxication and things and these things. And we all do our best. Sometimes we'll take vows to do this when we're like 16 or 17 years old, and you're thinking, all of a sudden you're thinking, oh my God, I might have like 70 more years that I really have to do this. But after a while, those things become insignificant. At first, somebody may be thinking, oh, I can't eat this kind of food, or I can't drink that, or something like that. But after a while, you just don't. It's not part of it's just not part of how you roll. So we don't think, oh, I can't do that. I say, I'm not going to be interested in that stuff. We don't like it. And some of us never liked it, some of those things anyway. We got into it because of the company we kept. And so we find other company. It's like when I was a kid, I was a kid living in the San Fernando Valley area of Los Angeles, San Fernando Valley in the Los Angeles area. This is the late 50s, and the coolest people in the movies were juvenile delinquents. The easiest way to be a juvenile delinquent was to be in a gang, but there weren't any gangs for middle-class white kids in the San Fernando Valley in the 1950s. So we made our own, and we did little criminal things. And at a certain point, my dad got a job across the country in Washington, D.C., and I thought, I've never asked him about it, but I've sometimes wondered if that was just to get me away from my fellow gang members.
Now all the gangs are there.
Yeah, now all the gangs are there in the valley. They've been pretty well established. Does that help? Is that okay?
Thank you.
Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
So this is the first time I've seen you with the covered stick. I don't know about that. What's the significance of the covered stick?
The dunda. This is called a dunda.
Uh-huh.
It's a very fancy name for stick. I mean, it's Sanskrit for stick.
Either.
Yeah, it's generally called a danda. Our danda is the Vaishnava, and a danda is something that's carried by a sannyasi in every school. Many of the schools, they carry what we call an ekadanta. It's just simple, it's one bamboo rod. But those who worship Lord Vishnu, Lord Krishna, they carry a tree danda. So it's 3 bamboo rods bound together. Actually, there's a 4th. And they signify dedication. Sometimes we talk about sannyasa as being a life of renunciation, but it's not really. It's a life of detachment. And more importantly, dedication. So we can, there are 3 ways to kind of approach life. One is exploiting the world, trying to get, going for all the gusto we can. The old bumper sticker, he who dies with the most toys wins. Actually, he who dies with the most toys is dead. Somebody else all of a sudden has the toys, right? Can't take it with you. And then there's renouncing it, and oh, this is bad. And so I'm going to go to the mountains and live in a cave and just meditate and not be tempted by the world. It's not my thing. And then the third choice is dedication to divine service. And that's what the tree danda signifies. It signifies dedicating 3 things. Kaya, mana, and vak. The body, the mind, and our speech to the service of the Lord. And we add a 4th, in our school, we add a 4th rod that signifies dedicating our very selves. That's that Atma Nikshepa, Atma Samarpana. And that's what makes that Atma, and the thing is, these kinds of dedication, they're not just for sannyasis. You don't have to wear weird Swami clothes to engage in to dedicate these 3 things. But Srila Prabhupada says that anybody in whatever status of life, whether they're students or family people or whatever, retired folks or whatever, if they're dedicated, to the extent that they're dedicating their body, mind, and speech to the service of the Lord, to that extent they're sannyasis. But this is all I've got now for the rest of my life. The other stuff, I've done it. Like I said, I was married for 40 years. A long, happy, successful, Krishna conscious marriage. 2 daughters who grew up with their heads on straight, thanks to their mother. And father's a little nuts, but I did that. I had a professional life. I was an English professor and did all that stuff. And now it's time, the clock's ticking, and it's time for me to do some other stuff. And I was moved to do that by some interesting circumstances and kind of strange. Vrindavan.
Lord Chaitanya came to specifically give Ujjwal Prem Ras Bhakti. So that was not available prior to his appearance. Maybe you could talk about that, why that is?
I dare not, because partly because of the hour and partly because Manjari covered that this morning.
Oh, she did?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's probably in one of our groups on Facebook. Did we stream it live? Where's the picture? Did we stream it live on Facebook? So it's going to be there, right?
Yeah.
Where did we put it?
ISKCON of Hawaii page.
ISKCON Hawaii.
Yeah, and
ISKCON
Kusha's,
Hawaiian High.
Yeah, Hawaiian High.
So Manjari discussed that. She discussed that. She used the first verse of Brihad Bhagavatamrita to talk about that. And then she also referred to Rupa Goswami's Anarkatachari verse from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Okay, prasadam. Krishna's waiting for us in the form of prasadam.